Welcome to the Grassroots Health webinar series, Scientists Answer Your Questions. Today, I am delighted to present Dr. Reinhold Vieth from the University of Toronto to talk about his recent study about vitamin D reduces prostate cancer-associated lesions. For the record, all of the webinars that we are doing are being presented by what I would call the history makers in the vitamin D research field. Absolutely nobody has done it first. They have. They've also spent their careers, 30 to 40 years, working on this. Dr. Vieth is definitely one of those experts. Another history-making research project is being presented here by Dr. Vieth on vitamin D and prostate cancer, and it matters, even at an advanced stage of prostate cancer. I have a husband, as many women do, who's had prostate cancer and treatment. And I encourage any wife who is related to such a gentleman to make sure that your husband gets on vitamin D right now and at least gets their serum level to our panel's recommended levels of the 40 to 60 nanograms per milliliter or the 100 to 150 nanomoles per liter. It matters. Dr. Vieth, it's all yours. We are very eager to hear what you have to say today.
Thank you very much. I'm just switching to the very first slide. This little glitch here to kind of overcome. I'm trying to get control of the mouse.
Oh, I'm sorry. There you go.
There we are. You're allowing. There we go. Okay. Once we get over the technical glitches, what I'm showing today are the results of a double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized trial. It would be in what physicians call the category of level 1 evidence, the best kind of evidence that you would have for an effect of an agent. In this case, what we've got is a trial of just plain old vitamin D given at various relatively high doses. And the real question we want to know is, if you put plain old vitamin D into your mouth, will that change the amount of the vitamin D hormone in your prostate? If you take a look at this slide here, it's kind of a summary of the vitamin D system in which I kind of classify vitamin D into body compartments. Sunshine or diet give you plain vitamin D that needs to be activated in order to become something really useful in the body. 25-hydroxy vitamin D is the thing that we measure for vitamin D nutrition, but by itself 25-hydroxy does not do anything. Ever since the 1970s, we know that 25-hydroxy D is the raw material that the body uses to make a hormone. That's called 1,25-dihydroxy D, or it's also called calcitriol. And your dietary calcium intake determines your blood calcitriol level, and it's been published in 1979, as you can see in this particular graph. The best natural way to raise your calcitriol level is to go on a low calcium diet. Of course, that's quite controversial. But the thing that we're looking at today is something relatively new, and it's the fact that tissues throughout your body, including breast tissue or prostate tissue, have the ability to make their own calcitriol within those tissues. And what I wanted to demonstrate with my collaborators, who are excellent clinicians and other researchers, was if you put plain old vitamin D into your mouth, can you actually prove that that calcitriol goes up in the prostate? There was some previous research that had been done by our group that supported the grant application that was funded by the Canadian Cancer Society. The first one was a question: if you think about the sunshine during the course of the year, during summer, the sun gives you effectively a dose of vitamin D. And I was asking the question here, if you're following almost 200 men in what's called a watchful waiting protocol, where every calendar quarter they have their prostate-specific antigen, the PSA level, measured, if vitamin D is doing something good, then you should be able to detect it in the way prostate-specific antigen changes. And what you see on the y-axis, the vertical part of this, is basically a speedometer as to how fast PSA is rising. And according to the hypothesis, we expected that during that summer quarter of the year, this is Q2 represents the time between April, May, June. As you're heading into the summer, it's the phase in which PSA levels in this 200 men went slowest. PSA effectively didn't change during the summer, and then during the fall and winter, etc., PSA tended to rise on average 1% per month in these men. There was another clinical trial that was done similarly. In the y-axis, you're looking at a speedometer, the rate of rise in PSA. And during the year before the 6 months before starting on 2,000 vitamin D, the PSA in these men, they happened to be men who had failed radiation treatment for prostate cancer. Their PSA was going up about 5% per month during at least 2 calendar quarters. During that 3-month period where they went on to the vitamin D, you can see that the rate of rise in PSA slowed down to 2%, which is a good thing, and the dose was not that large. In a way, it's somewhat similar to Dr. Hollis's study that he presented last week. This was done in the early 2000s. So we obtained some money and we wanted to test some hypotheses. And the way we work often in medicine is to try to uncover mechanisms. It's almost like an engineer trying to reverse engineer a car. How can you find how the gears connect, how the processes work? So again, what we were aiming to do is give plain old vitamin D, and then hoping to raise the 25-hydroxy vitamin D, and by the same token, allow the prostate to make its own calcitriol. This was important because nobody had ever shown that. If you give one thing, a different molecule, calcitriol, ends up being higher in the prostate. And we hope that based on the basic research that's been done in cells and in animals, that good things will happen. Well, my colleague, Dr. Theo van der Kwast, suggested a molecule called K. It's a protein that goes up in order to signal cells to replicate more slowly. This was our main outcome, and it was measured by pathology of the prostate tissue. So this is the clinical trial. It was very difficult to find men. This study is done in Canada, where perhaps they don't do surgery quite as fast as in the U.S., or for whatever reason, nobody could do this work in the U.S. But here it took about 5 to 8 weeks between the time the surgeon scheduled the prostatectomy until the prostate was removed. And during that time interval, men were recruited, ethics approved, etc., and they were randomized to either 400 units of vitamin D per day, 10,000 units of vitamin D per day, which I regard as a high physiological intake. That middle dose is what you could get from sunshine if you lay on the beach every day. And then a pharmacological dose, 40,000 units of vitamin D per day, was given to a group, and they didn't know whether they were getting vitamin D at all. And then at radical prostatectomy, we took the tissue. And we were able to show, at least what we're trying to show here, is that the blood level of 125 DIE calcitriol went up between baseline and final, or within the prostate tissue, as they took more vitamin D by mouth. Prostate tissue calcitriol levels went up. And this was very important, because if you can't get the drug or the agent into the organ, then of course you can't really prove that the agent's doing anything. So we ended up indeed proving this part of the mechanism. The next stage was to look at the pathology, and again here Ki67 is a protein that functions in the cell cycle. Cells go through a cycle, various processes that go on as they start to reproduce each other. And there are a couple of stages at which effectively Ki67 acts as if it's putting on the brakes. Cell replication is bad if you've got cancer, because you don't want your cancer cells to keep increasing in numbers. And indeed, when we looked at various kinds of statistics, if you looked at, on the horizontal axis, prostate 125D versus the marker, proliferation marker went down as the calcitriol went up. Again, another piece of the puzzle. I was very gratified that Larissa Nahn of the University of Chicago approached me to help look at our tissues further, and there are some new kinds of markers that have become interesting in cancer. They're called microRNA. They're not things that end up being DNA, but they control the way your genome is expressed. And in terms of breast cancer, there were 3 microRNAs, LET7, microRNA 100, and microRNA 125. These are fancy code numbers, but these are ones that were particularly good for survival in breast cancer. Basically, what happened was we provided Dr. Nahn and her laboratory colleagues with prostate tissue. They used microscopic dissection and laser captures to collect specific parts of the prostate and then to basically stain them and mark them for the microRNA. And again, the prostate tissue of 125D resulted in better levels of these agents that effectively put the brake on cellular proliferation, different markers. And those 3 markers that were good in other cancers were also responding well with the prostate 125D. We were quite excited about it, and basically what it does, it puts that machine, that reverse engineering of the machine together more nicely. We're looking here at some statistical graphs, but basically the control system is all kind of working itself out. In order to study something, you have to understand the machinery, and it's understanding the machinery in the end that lets you do the more kind of rigorous clinical trials that you're really keen on. You want to know, will taking higher doses of vitamin D cure my prostate cancer, or will it cure cancer? And at this point, we cannot say that for sure. The reason is we've got a lot of clues, we've got preliminary data, but so far there's not been enough preliminary data to justify the larger clinical trials. I think based on this work here, other people should be inspired to do the work that takes thousands of people, not 67 or whatever we've done, but thousands of people to in order to prove that vitamin D does good things with regard to prostate cancer. A lot of skeptics are going to say, well, this doesn't prove anything. Well, so far what we've got is basically a little model, and the way my analogy is that Ki-67 acts like a foot on the gas pedal. What we've done is showing that the Ki-67 comes off the gas pedal. It slows down cellular proliferation, and then what we've done with the higher dose of vitamin D was basically put the brakes on the speeding car of cancer. These men all had cancer. This is research that does implicate that perhaps vitamin D should be, useful, or certainly looked at more rigorously in patients with cancer. But the other thing that our research has done, and again back to those earlier slides that I showed you, I think higher doses of vitamin D will help to prevent prostate cancer as well. It's good for the machinery, and if it's good for this machinery, it's both good in terms of prevention and therapy. Problem is, to this point, that conclusive stage of the research has not been undertaken. It's challenging. Some of my guesses, I think calcium is an interesting compound. There's some suggestion that high levels of calcium seem to relate to prostate cancer. Well, one of the reasons might be that high levels of calcium actually lower that magical hormone calcitriol in the body, and calcitriol is good for prostate. So you can see a little bit of a, an odd relationship in particular with the calcium, but nobody's done a lot of research on that. So far what we're doing is showing clues, and the real hard research has to be done, but some of this does have a take-home message. And thank you for this. That's the end of my talk. Back to you, Carol.
Dr. V, thank you so much. Thank you very much. I think it's extremely exciting to think that vitamin D can help. There's a lot of evidence with many diseases. What you've just done and demonstrated, I think, is fantastic. We'll talk with Dr. Vieth's questions here, but I have one specific thing, though, Dr. Vieth, to add and/or question right here myself. Vitamin D is relatively safe, certainly in the levels that most people would need to take, like possibly up to 10,000 IU a day. Since we don't have yet this massive 1,000+ people clinical trial in place, would it not be useful for what Grassroots Health is doing with our population study if we have already a group of women involved in our breast cancer prevention study to see if higher levels of vitamin D do indeed prevent breast cancer, it sounds like we need to have another arm in this study called a prostate cancer prevention study. Any comments on that, please?
Well, I totally agree. I think there's been so much focus on that main cancer in women, breast cancer, that people have ignored men who suffer from prostate cancer to a degree that's exactly the same as the breast cancer disease effect in women. We have to do it.
Well, we'll do it. All right. Let's take a look at the questions. I will read each one of them so they can be recorded and people don't have to see them. So we started with vitamin D safety. There were quite a number of questions that we got from our people on safety. So is it okay to take 50,000 units at a time? What is the maximum dosage that can be safely taken at a time?
Yeah. I would not take more than 200,000 at once, because that's certainly bad. Your body, it's difficult to answer it straight, but 200,000 is certainly far too much. 50,000 is a nice number. If you had a new drug, the dosing cycle for a new drug is its half-life. In other words, for vitamin D, the half-life is in the order of 2 months. So you can take 60 days of vitamin D all at once every 2 months. It's not outrageous. So 50,000 units to me would be a reasonable dose to take once every 2 weeks. It would give you something in the order of almost 4,000 units per day equivalent. I wouldn't take 50,000 units a day myself, but recognize in our clinical trial we used 40,000 units per day. Why 40? Because we were doing what's called a loading dose. We only had 8 weeks, roughly one half-life of vitamin D in order to fill up the body. So that 40,000 units was the most we could reasonably do. What's the lowest? The next question is, what's the lowest level of supplemental vitamin D that could cause undesirable side effects? Don't go into the 100,000 unit range. Stick to the 50,000 units once every 2 weeks. There's some concerns, like the one study of osteoporosis that was looking at 500,000 units once a year was quite ridiculous, basically poisoning people once a year and then being surprised that it did bad things. Anything that works. If something works in your body, then too much will be bad. So take vitamin D with a grain of salt. 50,000 units once every 2 weeks is my suggestion. If you want to aim for a certain blood level, there's more knowledge required than I can really get across in a couple of seconds of answering. Is there a toxic level for vitamin D, and is there any danger with regard to the recommended dose? Recommended dose, which one are you referring to? 4,000 units per day? Absolutely no danger. That's the same as 400 units given to a baby. 4,000 units per day is what I would consider physiologic. There are several large clinical trials, fortunately, that are looking into the 2,000 to 3,000 units per day range, and they'll get published probably in the year 2017 or 2018. The people who say, well, there's no evidence yet, are sitting and waiting for 2017 and 2018 to get some new news as to whether higher doses of vitamin D are good. Is there a toxic level for vitamin D? Just basically what I said. Do not take 200,000 units per day. You'd be foolish. If it works, 200,000 units is too much. I'm taking 6,000 units per day, asks one question, and wonders about effects of doses around 40,000 units. 40,000 units? 6,000 is fine. It's comparable to that 4,000 unit dose. 40,000 units per day is verging on foolishness in the long run. If you want to take 40,000 units per day for a year, nobody knows it's doing you any good, and I would take caution with it. I wouldn't do it myself. Side effects of really high doses relate to urine calcium and serum calcium. You can monitor your urine calcium and serum calcium quite readily when you have your doctor give you a checkup. Next slide, perhaps. I need more questions.
Serum levels and dosage, here they are.
Okay, is there a target blood level that's therapeutic for prostate cancer? Answer, nobody knows for sure. But based on our study, I would think that something in the, oh goodness, I'm in Canadian numbers, higher than, let's say 150 nanomoles per liter or 60 nanograms per milliliter would be a reasonable number to aim for. It's very conservative from my point of view. It's still physiologic, something you can get from sunshine. What vitamin D levels would be helpful for men with low risk of prostate cancer who are pursuing active surveillance? Remember, we did have a study that used 2,000 units per day. That was beneficial. Dr. Hollis's study from last week was using 4,000 units per day. So if you kind of listen to the way the theme is, that 4,000 to 6,000 unit per day intake is a very comfortable one. And I advise you, if you want to take vitamin D, take it flat out. Don't say, oh, it's summertime, I don't need to take it. Take it steadily all the time. One of the problems, I think, with regard to prostate cancer is seasonality. Northern latitudes have higher risk of prostate cancer. I think what happens is that summertime pulse of vitamin D and then wintertime deprivation. Don't go on it, go off, go on, go off. Stick with it. Take a steady dose forever. It's probably the cheapest of the vitamins that you can buy, and so just stick with it.
Dr. Vieth, in your study that you just did, what was the serum level of the men who had the 40,000 IU a day for the week or whatever period they time?
It was over 200 nanomoles per liter. It was certainly in the 100 nanograms per milliliter range. That's true.
Okay. Thank you.
It was pretty high, but I cannot advocate that. Like, I don't know.
I understand.
We did it for research reasons to try to elicit a response, but
right.
You know, I'm not an advocate of it. I had to do it in order to produce a visible response. It's not straightforward.
Sure.
Number 3. Where am I now?
Number 3.
Number 3. I don't know the answer to that. It's basically my usual dosage of vitamin D. I don't know what would be different.
Dr. Vieth, we had an important question I'd like to ask you to clarify, please. What's a loading dose?
It's okay, let's say you put a hole in a bucket, and the bucket's draining out as you put water into it, right? If you keep putting water in, eventually, you know, you reach a steady state level of water in that bucket. What if you wanted to fill the bucket to that steady state level right away? That's a loading dose, the dose that it takes to fill the compartment.
Thank you.
If you start, let's say I start on 1,000 units of vitamin D per day. When's my steady state blood level going to be achieved? It'll be achieved after 3 to 4 half-lives. In other words, 6 to 8 months from now. I don't want to wait 6 to 8 months. I want my final 6 to 8 month level happening in 2 weeks. Okay? The loading dose for vitamin D is basically the cumulative amount you take in 1 half-life. In other words, 60 days worth all at once will load your body up, and then you stick to the regular dose at once. The loading dose for 1,000 units is 60,000 units, and then you carry on with 1,000 units per day.
Thank you very much. Okay. Question number 3. With stage 4 cancer and on Lupron.
The Lupron, I'm sorry,
That's right.
I'm not able to answer that. And also our study really didn't look at stage 4 cancer, so I have no information on that. I'm sorry to say. How much vitamin D should the average Canadian be taking, considering our lack of sun? Well, Canada is actually south of Europe. And Toronto is on a latitude equal to Omaha and Boston. It's that little finger. You're asking for recommendation, and all I can say is do for yourself what you would do for your brand newborn baby who's getting 400 units. You yourself, as an adult, would be prudent to take 4,000 units per day. Dietary recommendations are still in, the 600 units RDA level, but there's no harm in the 4,000 units per day, that's for sure.
And of course, what we recommend with our study and our panel and our research is that people get their vitamin D levels tested and then take whatever it takes to get to at least that 40 to 60 nanogram per milliliter range. Okay. Vitamin D and prostate.
Yeah.
Are we talking prevention, cure, or both?
If it works on well, this is a biological, natural compound that's always working in the background. It's both. It affects biology of the prostate, whether it's healthy or cancerous tissue.
Thank you.
Is there a link between vitamin D adequacy and decreased recurrence of prostate cancer? Dr. Moon from the Netherlands did show that men diagnosed with breast cancer, prostate cancer, bowel cancer in the summer had a better prognosis than those diagnosed during the low vitamin D winter months there. So there is a link. And I would say this link is not unlike the one that's been shown for breast cancer as well.
Right.
Will vitamin D change the results of a PSA test? What we did find, remember my earlier slides, the doses that I gave, previously, or even the seasonal doses, basically slowed the rate of rise of PSA. If you're watching PSA, it's going up. And what happens when you put your foot on the brake is the car slows down. Doesn't mean it stops totally. Although in our particular study, those high doses, we did have a statistical decline in PSA in that one. So that it'll change the results in a good way. Can vitamin D prevent benign prostatic hypertrophy from turning into cancer? I can't tell you for sure the answer to that, but you can tell probably the way I've been speaking, I would be optimistic. But nobody can say it can prevent it. It's been reported that vitamin D raises the level of testosterone. I don't know that report. And I don't think I detected any change in testosterone in our study. So I have to sort of decline on answering that question number 5.
Number six.
Any tests on prostatectomy patients with increasing PSA numbers? Well, we did have that radiation study where, when 2,000 units of vitamin D was given, the rate of rise in PSA slowed down with higher vitamin D intake. Yes, some, but not a lot of research. Number 7, will vitamin D support suppression of prostate cancer cell growth from positive margins when the prostate's been removed? I cannot answer that. Like, the frustration for all of us, whether you're a patient or a researcher or a surgeon, is often nobody knows the answers to your really good questions. Number 8, are there any studies on 25D levels in PSA and no cancer? No, actually not. I don't know of any. It would be a good idea to do that. Is there any evidence that vitamin D has a beneficial effect in benign prostatic hypertrophy? And if so, there is no known evidence on that I know of with regard to BPH. Plant-based diet is linked to lower cancer. I don't know the answer to number 10 either. Like I said, there are a lot of good questions, but often just not the information upon which to base an honest answer. We'd be guessing. Other questions. Would obtaining vitamin D from sun or sunbeds be any better than supplements? I heard it. You get vitamin D into your body one way or another. It doesn't matter how you do it. There's no evidence one way or another that it makes a difference. That's a long debate, but bottom line, just get your vitamin D up one way or another. How much exposure to sunshine is necessary to synthesize vitamin D? What percentage of the body area should be exposed? Your skin is a factory that makes vitamin D. Most of us are covering 95% of that factory when we go outside. The more skin you expose, in a way, the better. One reason is you don't have to be out in the sun as long. If you're out in the sun for less time, you don't get skin cancer as much. So if you want to go out for 10 minutes at noon on a pleasant day in May, it's still not quite worth it to go out in the sun in Toronto. We're just getting up to, you need a UV index of at least 3 in order to make vitamin D, and it's like turning up a dimmer switch. You can just start to make it, but the higher the sun is above 45 degrees above the horizon, the better. It's been published that African Americans are more susceptible to prostate cancer than others, and is there a correlation here? Yes and yes. African Americans have remarkably low 25-hydroxy-D levels. Africans living in Nigeria have 25-hydroxy-D levels of 40 nanograms per milliliter. Africans living in North America have half that level. Think about it. Please compare the usefulness of D2 versus D3. Very little research has been done on D2. D3 is actually cheaper and, so far as we know, more potent. If you're a vegetarian, I'm happy to use D2. The next slide, is that it?
That is it. That is it at this point in time. That was a pretty powerful set of research and stuff that you presented in a short time, Dr. Vieth. We are very eager to help spread the word about vitamin D and prostate cancer. And all of you that are listening today, I hope you will share the video itself with others. It will be posted very shortly. And we're also in the process of transcribing these to text so that you will have this in written form. And this also will be a very key one for us to get out very quickly. Next week, we have another cancer researcher, Dr. Joellen Welsh, who has done extensive research with vitamin D and breast cancer at the molecular level, working a lot with mouse models. And she will be able to demonstrate what she has done specifically with vitamin D and stopping breast cancer cell growth. Please tune in for that and stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, I hope many of you who are not already part of our vitamin D Action project will log on to our website and enroll that, and or especially men who would like to participate in a prostate cancer prevention study, which is going to be launched very soon. So again, thanks to each and every one of you, and especially you, Dr. Vieth. We really, really, really appreciate your work, and you're taking the time to share it with us. So have a great day to everyone.
Thank you.